Welcome to the Boss It Weekly podcast, a no-nonsense, no-hype, frank and close-up analysis of what is currently working and what is not in the world of software. The Boss It podcast is packed with major takeaways for software business owners and managers. So, let's begin.
And another Boss It podcast. I don't even know what number this is, but I know we're into series 2 and we've done quite a lot. During this time of social distancing, we've been taking the opportunity to reach out at quite a wide range of people. And today we're going to be speaking to Sandra Spielberg. She is an author. She's got a new book coming up. She's got a background within health, which I'm very interested to find out about. And I've also seen that she's been rated by Morgan Stanley as a healthcare transformer, which I was quite interested to find out about. So Sandra, welcome to Boss It Podcast.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. What's this I saw about Morgan Stanley, top 40 healthcare transformer? What's that about?
Yeah, well, actually, so two separate awards there. The first one is Medical Marketing and Media named me a top 40 healthcare transformer, and that was for the work that I did to start and build Seeker Health, which is a patient finding platform, a piece of software that we built to help clinical trials find patients. And then separately, then Morgan Stanley named the company one of the healthcare transformers, one of the healthcare disruptors. So pretty much around the same time, we received these two awards. And it was the Morgan Stanley award. They put together a list of privately held companies that were transforming the landscape in health, right? And in particular, they looked at this category of companies that were bringing software to create more efficiency in the healthcare industry. And then obviously the company that I had built, Seeker Health, that was our main mission. It was to bring efficiency to this process of finding patients for clinical trials.
Oh, I see. I've always smiled because I remember the quote which says that the English and the Americans are two nations separated by a language, because healthcare transformer is something that I would have had with a train set. With electricity.
That's right.
It didn't quite fit somehow I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I was thinking, what are they actually trying to say there? But I get it. So there's transformation, right? Excellent. So, I mean, I want to have a chat with you, particularly about your book, which is just about to be published, I think, or has
Yes,
it been
it
published?
just came out.
Just came out. Excellent. Well, that's good timing for us. But before we do that, tell us a bit about your background. So who is Sandra? Where do you come from? And what was your early career? What were you trained to do?
Yes, that's a great question. And I'll start at the very beginning because I think there are a couple of areas that are relevant. So I'm an immigrant from Uruguay. My family came to the United States when I was a teenager. We came to New York, like many immigrants do. And there I went to college and I first trained to be an accountant. And I worked on Wall Street for a couple of years and then realized that I wanted to be working on a product that was what I said back then was of higher utility, right? I wanted the end user of whatever I was working on to really need what I was working on. And so I went to get my MBA at Wharton. And during that MBA, I did an internship at Genentech, which is basically the mother of all biotech companies. Wow. And that internship really confirmed for me that I loved this intersection of health and business, right? I was already bringing a solid business background and, applying that to the healthcare space really got me excited. And so immediately after finishing my MBA, I continued my career in biotech. I worked for very large companies like Cenocor, which was owned by Johnson & Johnson. And as time went by, I went smaller and smaller. So went to BioMarin, which was when I joined a small company developing drugs for rare diseases, and then moved on to an even smaller company, a little startup that was venture-backed, that was developing a product for recurrent miscarriage. And that evolution is important because I was trying to go to smaller and smaller companies. There was something in me that was quite entrepreneurial and really interested in that start. Like, how do businesses begin? How do you make a business be born? And how does it survive and thrive through the years? And so what ended up happening was that at Nora Therapeutics, I ran into a very important problem for the biopharmaceutical industry, which is to find the patients to enroll into a clinical trial. So let me just back up for 1 second. Clinical trials are the studies that are run in humans. They are required in order to get those treatments into the market, right? And so, for example, right now in the time of COVID, whenever we're going to be looking at a COVID treatment or a COVID vaccine, all of those will have to go through a clinical trial in order to collect the data, in order to get approval. And in order to do that, we need to have patients that act basically as the human volunteers on whom this treatment is tested. Now, at Nora, the last company that I was at, we ran into a problem enrolling the clinical trial. And for this particular patient population, I knew that these patients were online. They were talking to each other. I could see it. And yet there wasn't really a way to access them, to pre-screen them, and then to bring them into a system where they could be connected to the hospital that could enroll them. And so, I patched up some, a system for them that wasn't exactly what I wanted. But then eventually the company decided not to pursue this treatment and to shut down the company. They had run out of funding and there wasn't anything else to pursue at that time. And so here I was faced with this sort of fork on the road. I could have either polished my resume and try to find another job, or I could pursue this problem that I had just encountered and try to solve it with a company that I would build. And so obviously I chose the second, and I started a company called Seeker Health. And Seeker Health was all about trying to create this end-to-end platform that would allow us to find patients, especially those with rare diseases, because that's where I had been working, to find them via online advertising, pre-screen them online. And pre-screening is the process of asking them a few questions to see if they would qualify for the study, and then bring them into a secure piece of software where they can be connected to the next step in the process, which is usually to visit a hospital or a clinic in order to be enrolled into the clinical study. And so this was in November of 2015.
So you escaped from the exciting world of accountancy and where you were trained to get into biotech. What made you do that? Didn't you want to be an accountant?
It's kind of interesting because I actually love accounting. And I have to tell you, one of the reasons why my business, Seeker Health, was successful and why I was able to sell it, right, was because of how much I loved accounting, right? Because I understood profit. I understood what EBITDA means, right? And how to make that better. And so I wouldn't say necessarily that I had an allergic reaction to accounting, because that's not I actually really love accounting. What was missing for me in those early years was connecting the business to something that I felt was a problem that could make an impact on people's lives. And that's what took me to health, right? In healthcare, most of the things that we work on at the end of the day are meant to improve that person's health, which hopefully, makes them live either a longer or a better life. And so those were things that I felt connected to, right? If I could be using my time, as a person on this planet and as a professional to, contribute to whatever part I could, right, of making somebody a better life, then I would.
Yes.
Now, of course, I could have decided to be a physician, but that wasn't really available to me because, as I mentioned earlier, I was an immigrant. And so initially, when I came to the United States at age 16, very quickly, I was looking to get a job. I was looking to be financially independent. So signing up for the physician training, which in the U.S. is anywhere from 8 to 12 years of not really making an income that would help you, was really something that was not available to me as an immigrant back then. And so, I ended up doing business in healthcare, which is probably a great fit for me because I really do enjoy the business side and I do enjoy financial statements. And I, of course, enjoy the opportunity to build technology that helps bring efficiency to treatment development, and eventually those treatments can make an impact on the people that they're serving.
When you were building Seeker Health, when was the time when you felt as though that you made a really significant breakthrough? When was that turning point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it was towards the end of the second year. We had enrolled a clinical trial. And this clinical trial, prior to Seeker Health becoming involved in it, this clinical trial was really stuck. The company was in trouble. They couldn't finish this trial. So we came in to rescue and finish the enrollment of the clinical trial. A couple of months later, the data was filed with the FDA for approval. And then about 9 months later, the treatment was approved. And so when that treatment got approved, that was the first treatment that got approved after being enrolled by Seeker Health. I really felt like here we are making a difference, right? This was the extreme scenario of this trial wasn't going to enroll unless, a company like ours did something with it to find these last few patients. And we enabled that. We enabled the finding of the last few patients. We enabled the filing of the drug for approval. And then we, in essence, enabled the drug reaching those who need it. And that's when I started realizing this works. We're helping, right? We're making an impact.
You can see a direct relationship between that critical step and saving lives.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was for a condition that is pretty intense. It's called LEMS, Lambert-Eaton myasthenic syndrome. People, become quite debilitated by the condition. And so this new treatment is meant to help them, right, live a better quality of life.
Yes. We have a lot of people, obviously, because we focus, this podcast is for people particularly when in the software tech sector. So a lot of the people that listen are fairly technical. Tell us a little bit more about your solution, the technology behind it. What was really driving that, and what were the strengths of Seeker Health?
Yes, excellent question. So I want to take you back to the point that we began by running online marketing campaigns to find the patients. And then these patients would be brought to a website where they could take a pre-screener. So all of this is pretty simple technology. But what would happen then is that the big question or the big problem was, what do we do with this data that we have collected, right, from the patients? So they're patients. Yes. So now we need a secure system that eventually, right, would have to become GDPR compliant, that eventually would have to become compliant with California privacy protection. And we need this system also to be accessible to those that need the data next. So that was where the challenge really was. At the end of the day, what we ended up building is a very specific CRM system, right? So customer relationship management system, where the customer here is the patient that is trying to enroll into the clinical trial, and the user of the data is the clinic that is going to enroll the patient. And in between these two users, the patient and the clinic, there is the biopharmaceutical industry who is overseeing the process, but some of them don't want to oversee it by breaking the patient privacy. And so a lot of what our system was designing the CRM system that was going to meet the needs and the restrictions of each of the users that were using it, right? So clinics needed to see all the patient data, but biopharmaceutical companies had certain employees that were prohibited from seeing some of the data, right? So they needed to see a record, but they couldn't see the patient's name or email or phone number or any other distinguishing characteristics. And so that's what we ended up building, what I would call a very sort of proprietary, very customized for this use CRM system. There were, probably because I am an immigrant from Uruguay, from the beginning, I decided to make this a global system. And so in addition to operating in English and taking intake from English and U.S. population, we also took interest forms from anyone in the world, right? So that meant that the system had to operate in different languages, also had to have many different zip code databases loaded so that we can assign the patients to the correct site, right? The correct clinical trial clinic. Yeah, so that's what we ended up building. And, it was here there was I always like to say, a lot of entrepreneurs are looking for like an idea in order to build a business, but really a business is solving a problem. And here what I had found was a problem. Here was a problem and it needed a very specific solution. You couldn't take an off-the-shelf CRM system and use it for this because it wasn't going to have the privacy. It wasn't going to have this assignment feature that we were looking for by geography. It wasn't going to have the messaging capabilities that we needed to make this connection really tight from the patient to the clinic. And so we built it.
How did you get to that place? Because interesting what you said was that I speak to a lot of startup companies, maybe 4 or 5 a week sometimes, and there is a lot out there. There's a lot of startup companies that aren't successful, for one, and a lot of them are in love with their technology and they're passionate. But in tracking them, I find that a lot of them are trying to solve a problem. Sometimes they've got a solution and they go looking for the problem, which is very dangerous. The other scenario that I see, which again can be very difficult, is they've found a problem which they're able to solve, but actually they're not close enough to their target market to understand, it is a problem, but it's not a big enough problem for us to worry about. It's not a prioritized problem because we've got some much bigger problems that get in the way. And they're trying to sell this solution and the buyers are going, I agree, but it's not that big a problem. They don't have that connection. What was the sort of the spark for you to say, actually, this is something that we've got to sell, and it's a problem that really does need to be solved?
Yeah, that is such an excellent question. And I love the way you set it up. There are a lot of businesses out there that is a solution, but there is no problem to really solve. And then there are certain problems that are not big enough for the buyer to do anything, to buy what you're selling. So I think here what the sort of like lampposts were along the way was that first I had seen it at my last company that this was a huge problem. This could have been the problem that ended the company, right? Being unable to enroll. Prior to that, in the previous biotech company that I had worked on, which was a little bit larger, this was also a problem, this problem of finding patients. So now I had 2 data points. Of this being a problem. And then, anytime I would look at any research from the industry, right? I could just Google trouble enrolling clinical trials and I would get industry papers that gave me data that I could put basically on the equivalent of a pitch deck that said 80% of clinical trials run into enrollment delays and 30% of clinical trials are canceled completely because the company can't find the patients.
Wow.
And so it was sort of like a combination of my direct experience with data that was out there, basically saying this is a problem. And there were players in this area. There were enrollment companies already, but many of them were either not using technology to the best of its potential, or 2, they weren't focused on rare diseases and on specialty conditions. And one of the other things that I understood from working in rare diseases was that was the area of growth in treatments, right? There aren't that many new companies investing in a new treatment for cholesterol, right? Because there's already so many solutions there. But there are lots of companies working to bring new treatments for rare diseases, right? And a rare disease in the US is defined as a disease that affects less than 200,000 people.
Okay.
Yes. And so here, I think, part of the success was, validating the problem, but also targeting the solution to an area in the market that was growing. And that was the rare and specialty market. And by specialty, I mean, not things that a generalist would treat, a generalist physician. So not, asthma and eczema and cholesterol and diabetes, not that, but things that would be treated by a specialist. So cancer, right? ALS. Right? Those types of conditions that are much more serious. There is urgency on the side of the patient and there's urgency on the side of anybody in the healthcare system to find a new solution.
And was your primary customer the pharmaceutical companies, or was it the clinics, or were you working with both?
Great question, because that was actually a very important decision to make early on in the company. My client, the person the company that footed the bill, that paid my invoices, was the biopharmaceutical company.
Right.
I had competitors that were doing it differently, and the company that was footing the bill were the clinics that were enrolling. So it is a possible business model as well.
Sure.
What I liked about having the biopharmaceutical as the client was that they, at the end of the day, had the biggest incentive in terms of enrolling the trial, because once the trial got enrolled, then a number of milestones were enabled for them. They could go raise more funds, right? They could submit the data to the FDA.
They've got pretty deep pockets, haven't they, as well? These big biopharmaceutical companies.
Exactly. They do have deep pockets, especially the emerging and mid-sized biotech companies are very willing to try new approaches, right? And I think here I benefited quite a bit from their willingness to try a new approach and see if it was going to help them enroll their clinical trial.
So you were very targeted about and saw who your market was, who you were focused at. Yes. As regards to the marketing, how did you gain their attention? Because that's the very first important step. And we live in the internet age where it's very noisy. It's very difficult to be heard. How did you do that?
Yeah, and are you referring to the attention of the patients or the attention of the biopharmaceutical companies?
Biopharmaceutical companies, yes. First of all, but then, for you as well, you also need to be able to do it with the patients. But I guess that's a different solution, perhaps.
Yes, for the biopharmaceutical companies, because this was my first business, I literally tried every possible marketing technique, and I tested
That's
them
one
all.
way of doing it. You just try everything.
I tried them all, tested them all, and then where I came out was that this was basically a direct sales, relationship management, thought leadership type of sale, right? Yes. So this was not a Google advertising type of sale, right? So I did run some Google ads, but the companies that came to me were not what I was looking for. So instead, what worked was to work through relationships as much as I could. Then immediately after that, to develop thought leadership, to basically write on LinkedIn, publish podcasts, whatever it might be that was talking about a new solution, the problem and the new solution.
Yes.
And then very specific industry conferences, right? Conventions that were devoted to clinical trials or were devoted to rare diseases, where I would get up and present what our solution was. And immediately after that, I would obtain a number of leads that I can follow up on. So that's what worked. And what generally didn't work was anything that wasn't targeted, that wasn't relationship based, and that was maybe like too general or too online.
Yes.
That didn't quite work for this type of business, because this is like a true B2B business, right? I need to connect to that professional that is the buyer for this type of service.
And how long did you find it? What was your typical sales cycle for this?
Yeah, great question. So, generally I would do an initial presentation. Then maybe a couple of weeks later, they would, ask for a proposal, or I would try to get a proposal as quickly as possible. Sort of like end to end, a good 3 months to get in the door.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good. I think that there are many other companies in software tech that they would love to have a 3-month sales cycle.
Yeah, I thought it was long because usually I like things to go fast, and I thought 3 months was long. But then when I started talking to other people, especially in software, it turned out that 3 months was actually short, that their average was more like 6 months to a year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. And what about as regards to the patients? Because that's the other side of the equation, is how did you reach out to the patients?
Yeah, so for the patients, we use primarily Facebook and Google advertising. Our team became experts at optimizing these campaigns, and it was important to stay above the other noise that they saw. So we played a lot with, the different pieces of an ad that we can control, the images, right? So we always had an inventory of images, the text, the different text, configurations. But at the end of the day, we were online. We were trying to be very, very targeted to continuously optimize and improve the campaigns. And that's really what got us a good return, right? But that first piece of the puzzle is online marketing. And so we need to deliver lots and lots of impressions to get, about 1 to 2% of those to click through and come to the website and begin the process.
Interesting that you mentioned imagery, because that's something that we've seen in working with our clients. The visual aspect when you're trying to reach out to people is really important. And I think the industry tends to be quite word-based. They like writing long articles. And actually, if you want to grab someone's attention, a good visual, consistent imagery that, says something about your company and about your brand, that seems to be one of the sort of secrets of success, if you like. So interesting that you mentioned that. Your business grew and you were eventually acquired by Eversana.
Yes.
How long did that take?
Yeah, so we were acquired about 3 years into the business, so relatively on the earlier side of,
Sure.
I think, exits. What ended up happening is that, yes, we grew quite rapidly, right? And the software really enabled part of that growth because I was trying to build a company where the human beings didn't need to do the majority of the work, but the majority of the work was done by the machine, the software, and then the human beings were, of course, maintaining the relationship, updating the client, tweaking any parts of the campaign that needed to be tweaked. And so we grew pretty rapidly. Around the beginning of year 3, I started to get I first got one company that was interested in acquiring Seeker Health. And, it sort of made sense because this was an area that was a pain point for our industry, and companies that were doing work in adjacent areas like marketing communication firms or, firms that sort of worked in this space and have biopharma as their client. They were thinking, well, should we build this or should we buy it? Right. And so that's kind of the thought process that they were going through. Their clients needed this. So, build or buy. And so I got a first offer and I was a bit surprised by it, Mark, because I wasn't planning on selling the company yet. I knew that at some point I would have to consider an exit strategy and figure out what was next. But it seemed like a little early, right?
Yes.
And so I got that first offer, went through, the due diligence process with them, hired an external accountant to do a valuation on the company, and then came out on the side of not pursuing that first offer. I talk about this in the book. This is a whole section in the book. It felt like the valuation was too low. It felt like it wasn't really a good fit for our company. We had gone on a couple of joint pitches to get customers to buy us together, and they weren't really working that well. And they had admitted to that as well. And so we walked away from that one. In that time, a second company came around and again went to visit them. Didn't quite feel right either. It was they were mostly working on physician marketing. We were mostly working on patient marketing. Just didn't quite felt like that was the right thing. Around that time, something important happened, which is that I decided to get a coach, to get an executive coach to really help me sort through this decision. And I had never used a coach before, but this felt like the companies coming to buy Seeker Health has surprised me. And I wanted to take a pause to really think through what I need to be doing. Do I want to sell the company? Do I want to keep building it for another year? What are the pros and cons of doing each one? And so I worked with this coach and came out on the side that, yes, it seems like I had built significant value for me, right? Again, I was a sole owner of the company, so I didn't have other stockholders that needed to be happy about what the exit was.
Yes, that simplifies things to a great extent, doesn't it? You haven't got to worry about other shareholders. Yeah.
Absolutely. I only had to worry about whether it was enough, for what I considered it to be enough. And so there was enough value that had been built. And I felt like we had reached sort of like a nice place in the scaling where, I could maximize some of that value and begin to transition it out to somebody who would integrate it as part of a portfolio offering where it could get a lot of lift, right, by being offered with other things that company was already offering, right?
Yes.
So anyway, so at that time I didn't have an offer, but one of the things that I did with my coach is that I wrote down what I wanted. And that's the name of the chapter, chapter 10 in my book, which is to ask for what you really want. And to really know what it is that you want. Because, obviously I worked very hard to create this company. I only get to create it once. I only get to sell it once. So need to make it count.
Yes, absolutely.
That time. So, and so at that time I didn't have another offer, but, of course, another company came along. I call it in the book Company 3, and Company 3 came along. And by the time they came along, I was able to verbalize to them what I wanted. And so that was a much better place to start a deal, because once I could say, this is what I'm looking for, and they could say, well, it's not for us, or they could say, yes, that is for us. We're interested. Let us get back to you with a letter of intent that, fits that criteria. And so that's what happened with Company 3, which, Eversana, they ended up acquiring us. Eversana they've done a fantastic job as a private equity owned platform that's brought together many different companies that have biopharmaceutical as their customer. And basically the goal is to offer, basically an end-to-end solution for anything that a biopharmaceutical company would need in the development and in the commercialization of their products. Yes.
Yes, I was going to say, so that they were able to take your company and build the offering that they were offering to their customers. It was a natural fit.
Yes, exactly. It was a natural fit in the sense that we were fitting right at the beginning of the cycle, right? Because clinical trials happen before the drug gets commercialized. And so our company would fit in the beginning where, after they enroll their clinical trial, then lots of other Eversana services could be used. And then very likely for anybody who was using services down the pipeline, right? Then they could, when they have a new product, a new clinical trial, then Seeker Health could be offered for them to enroll their patients. And also we expanded, the application of Seeker Health to not only find patients for clinical trials, but also find them for other applications, right? There are other reasons why a biopharmaceutical company may need to find and connect to patients as they develop their drugs.
Oh, okay. Interesting. It sounds like you went through a big and very fast learning curve during those 3 years. And then at the end of that, how quickly did you decide that you would wanted to write a book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, I sold the company in September of 2018, began the integration process with Eversana, and then around June of last year, so June of 2019, I really felt that I had learned so much in this process.
Yes.
And one, I had learned so much, but two, I had done things a little bit differently than they are expected to be done here in Silicon Valley, right? So remember, I live in Silicon Valley, I live in Palo Alto. There's sort of like this formula of how you build a tech company, and I hadn't followed it, right? I didn't get a co-founder, a technical co-founder. I wasn't a programmer myself, right? I hired programmers. I didn't raise venture capital, right? I was sort of like doing it differently while being different, right? I'm a woman, I'm an immigrant, non-programmer. And so part of writing the book was to, one, reflect on the lessons learned, which were many. And then the second part of writing the book was to really show aspiring entrepreneurs that there are different ways to build a company, especially build a company that makes an impact and build a company that is profitable, right? There are different ways to do that. The way that Silicon Valley tends to do the companies is to fit a specific need, which is generally the needs of the investors to make a very, very large return. But if you took that off the table and now what you're working on is to make a return for yourself, right? And to make an impact with your work, then the structure and what the exit needs to be is completely different. And so that's part of what I'm trying to communicate in the book.
So you weren't influenced at all by investors or the investor community, because that's something that I do see happens with a lot of startup companies or companies in the early stage, where they see going out for investment as a critical step for them. It's almost a necessity. So it's really interesting that you said that you didn't find that. And one of the issues that I've seen in speaking to these companies and observing them over a period of time is that they take a lot of feedback from those investors who may not necessarily actually be parting with money, but the sort of thing that they're saying is, well, if you could do this, then we'd probably be more interested. And they create
Yes.
a new business plan, they charge off in that direction. And that really concerns me because
Yeah, absolutely.
more often than not, they'll do it and they'll go back and the investor will say, no, we're still not interested.
That's right. That's right. And now they changed their whole business plan
Yes,
to, sort of fit that
absolutely.
request, and then there's still no money at the end of the
You were
that.
going on things that you had actually experienced and you knew were a problem. You
That's
weren't
right.
going to be influenced by some investor saying, well, I don't think you should address that problem. I want you to take it over here. That, I think, for a lot of these investors, they have what I would call sometimes a veneer thin understanding of a market sector. That's not their job. Their job is to spot the future successes of the future. But when they start influencing the business plan and taking the entrepreneurs off target, I see that as a potential problem. And I've seen that a lot. That's one of
Yes.
the things that I find that quite annoying because I get so many people coming to me and they show me their business plan or they show me a presentation deck and I say to them, it seems to me that's odd. That aspect of your business is odd. Well, we spoke to an investor and they told it. Oh,
Mhm.
I sigh.
Yes, exactly. And Mark, I'm with you. And like my question, to that founder would be like, well, does that investor know this market better than
Yes.
you do? And
Yeah.
sometimes the answer is yes, that investor does know that market better than you do. And sometimes the answer is no, that investor doesn't know the business better than you do. In chapter 4, I write 10 reasons why I didn't seek venture capital for this business, right? And again, Mark, I want to disclaim that I might build a different business that requires venture capital and I
Sure.
have to go in that direction.
Sure.
But for this one, I didn't. And one of the reasons I include was that having met several venture capitalists, I didn't get the feeling that they really knew that much about clinical trial enrollment. Many
Yes.
of them had never been in a clinical trial. Many of them had never enrolled a clinical trial,
Yes.
right? And so I was I was cautious or maybe questioning whether the advice that they were going to be able to give me would be better than the advice that I would get by just asking a customer to try the software and pay me money for it, right?
Yes.
Um, and so I completely agree. But in chapter 4, I write these 10 reasons, and I think that's probably one of the best part of the book here, because what I want to do here is help founders kind of free themselves from this need to raise funds, right? They're
Yes.
constantly trying to raise funds and raise funds and raise funds. And
Yes.
while you're doing that, what are you doing? You're giving more and more of your company away, right?
Yes.
So now this baby that you're building, like somebody else owns like all the internal organs. Um, and then you are bringing in their need for these outlandish returns, you bringing them into the equation, right? And
Yes.
so now instead of building a company that maybe gets to 20 million in revenue and 5 million in profit and is considered a great success, you now need to build a company that gets to, 300 million in
Yes.
revenue, right? And forget about profit, right? Because
Yes.
generally a lot of the companies that are built from this don't end up being profitable until 10 years down the line. And so I'm just bringing a different perspective here. There's a different way to build companies. A lot of acquirers, they're looking for an accretive deal, right? They're looking to
Yes.
bring in income. And so if a founder, right, like I did, could change their mindset, and instead of saying, I'm going to build something really big and I'm going to do it really unprofitably, if instead of doing that, we say, I'm going to build something that makes an impact, that solves a problem, and that does it profitably, then that profit is what becomes the most attractive thing for a company to come and acquire you.
Yes, and I can hear in your voice that you were very passionate about that, and that
Yes.
passion has to fuel you because it's tough. There's always going to be constant obstacles that you can overcome, and I think if you're being pushed in a direction by investors, in a direction that you don't feel is right, I think it can take away some of the energy, and I think
Yeah,
that's
I
really
agree.
important as well. So it's really refreshing to hear that approach. I very much agree with that. Obviously, there are times when you need investors, but I don't see it as an essential step. I think it's something that you really need to consider carefully. And I don't think it's something that you should be doing just because your business is failing in a small, you've got a small company that's failing. You think by adding money to it, I'm going to make a big success. I think quite often you end up with just a bigger problem. I think you should
Yes,
try and solve it as a small organization. Make sure that you can get out there and gain the attention of your market, and you've got a close relationship with that target market that is saying, this is a great solution. We love it. We're going to give you recommendations. And you've really built that success on a small scale
yes,
before getting
exactly.
that investment. And I think a lot don't. They can't get it working. It doesn't seem to attract the market in the numbers they need. And they will often say to me, can you help us get some investment because we
Right,
need more sales and marketing? And actually, they just haven't built that formula for success. And I think they can
right.
end up with a bigger problem. What do you think? If you were to give a startup organization one tip, maybe what's one mistake that you see startups often make, and then what's one tip that you can give them?
Yes. I think the most important thing for a startup is to get early paying customers. So whoever it is that's going to be using your system, and I have a little bit of a B2B bend, right? So mostly what I'm talking about applies mostly to B2B instead
Sure.
of more like user type of applications.
Yes, like the
But in
B2C.
B2B, in B2B, the most important advice I can give is to very quickly get a minimum viable product and get a customer, right? And hopefully this is somebody that you built some sort of relationship in the past, you work together or you know them somehow, and get that customer to pay for something. Because the
Yes.
minute they start paying for something, a bunch of things happen. One, they're invested. So they're going to start telling you how to make this minimum viable product a product, right?
Yes.
And this is what happened with us, right? We had 4 early customers that were paying for these campaigns, and they were telling us, we need more. We don't need just the campaign. We need you to build a website. We need you to build the software. We want to test the software. And so those are the types of partners that you need. And they're
Yes.
paying for something. They're not paying the maximum value yet. But those early paying customers are really important, even if you're raising funds, because VC in general, they are going to be looking for a company with traction, and that's why you need those early paying customers anyway. So in the book, I write a whole chapter about these early paying customers and all their superpowers, right? Which is basically that they're going to help you shape the company, and they are the best people to help you shape the company because they're willing to buy a piece or the whole thing of what you're building. But also another important power that they bring is that if eventually you do need to raise funds, then you are able to show that you've had some traction. So no matter what role you take, whether you're going to bootstrap or raise funds, these early paying customers are really the most important first step to take.
Yes. So go out, find a paying customer, don't give it away because they've got to invest in it, and then listen very carefully to the feedback that they give you.
That's right.
Brilliant. That's a great tip. Your book, New Startup Mindset, it's being published by, is it HarperCollins? Am I correct?
No, it's not
Oh,
actually. It's published my company called New Mindset Media.
oh, okay.
Um, but thank you. Maybe someday.
Yeah.
With
Actually, I
HarperCollins,
was
Mark.
I was talking to an author. I think it was last week or the week before, and I think theirs was HarperCollins, and I thought I'd seen that yours was as well. But the next step maybe. So it's already been published. So where
It's
could
already
somebody
been
get hold of
published.
it?
It's out on Amazon.
On Amazon. Excellent. Super. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you today, Sandra. I think you made some very interesting points, and I think some great wisdom about investment. And I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there would like to hear a little bit more from you. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, do you have a website or an email
Yes.
address?
Yes, I have a
Okay,
website. It's my name, Sandra Spielberg, SHPILBERG.com. And there's a
su
contact form there.
super. Okay, well, what we'll do is when we publish this, we'll also put the name of the book and your website so somebody can get in contact with you. But thank you very much for today. I've enjoyed the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It was a great conversation.
Good luck with the book. Let me know how you get on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that was another episode of the Boss It podcast. As always, please feel free to give feedback. And if you've got a great story or a topic that you would like us to cover, then please let me know. And in the meantime, during this time of social distancing, keep focused, keep busy, keep your distance, and keep safe.